There are moments in life when a sound, a picture, or even a fleeting memory stops you in your tracks. For me, it's the sound of children laughing in a park. Every time I hear it, I can't help but think of one little boy, Turner, a child whose laughter once filled a home in Tennessee and whose story has become impossible to forget. But this is not just a story about one child. It's about the 79 days that revealed the best and worst of humanity love, trust, silence, and betrayal, all captured by cameras that were never meant to hold such weight. Tonight, we're going to walk together through his short but powerful life, the tragedy that took it away, and the lessons that America must confront if we're ever to protect children like Turner. Before the darkness came, there was light. Turner Wayne Simpkins was born on a warm June morning in 2018. He had soft blonde hair, blue eyes that sparkled when he smiled, and a laugh so pure it could brighten an entire room. In those early years, life seemed simple swings in the backyard, bedtime stories, superhero costumes scattered across his bedroom floor. He was a daddy's boy through and through, the kind of child who ran with open arms into his father's embrace, certain that love would always be there to catch him. And yet, as you'll see, love alone wasn't enough, because silence from those who should have acted would change everything. Turner Wayne Simpkins is born on June 18, 2018, in a hospital in Nashville, Tennessee. He arrives into a family young in age but rich in affection. His parents, Austin Simpkins and Sierra Ford, capture the first years of his life in photographs filled with play and laughter. In these images, Turner's blonde hair and blue eyes are paired with a smile that seems to belong everywhere: backyards, beaches, and birthday parties. The family home sits on Poplar Ridge Road in Chapmansboro, a small community where children still play outside until dusk. Turner has an older brother, Maverick. The two share a bedroom, toys, and even fears. When one grows anxious, the other stays close. They become, in the words of relatives later interviewed, inseparable. Their father hangs swings in the yard. On many afternoons, both boys sing along to Disney songs while taking turns pretending to be superheroes. Turner gravitates especially to his father. He runs to Austin with open arms, climbs on his shoulders, and follows him into small adventures, fishing trips, swimming pools, or simply a walk with the family dog. It is a bond that shapes Turner's sense of safety. To him, the presence of his father equals protection. Even after the separation between Austin and Sierra, Turner's mother remains part of his daily life. Weekends with her mean outings and long hugs at pickup time. For both parents, he is their baby. In this period, Turner's life represents what many would consider a healthy early childhood in the United States: access to family, play, and security. Psychologists note that children who grow up with consistent affection often develop resilience. Turner appears to fit that pattern. He enjoys costumes, from Batman to Mickey Mouse, and imagines worlds where good always triumphs. The lesson here is straightforward. When a child receives love and structure, they flourish. Yet, in narratives like this, light often precedes darkness. The same trust that makes a child thrive can also leave them defenseless when betrayed. And soon, another figure enters this household. Section 2. What happens when the very bond that makes a child feel safest becomes the opening through which harm is allowed to enter? From 2018 to early 2022, Turner's world is defined by one figure above all others: his father, Austin Simpkins. Family members later describe how the boy lights up whenever Austin enters a room. Turner sits on his father's shoulders at community events in Cheatham County, Tennessee, splashes beside him in swimming pools, and runs laughing into his arms after long days apart. Developmental specialists often emphasize the importance of paternal attachment in early childhood. For Turner, this attachment is visible. His sense of safety is tied directly to Austin's presence. He trusts that his father will set boundaries, respond to danger, and provide reassurance when life feels uncertain. That bond, however, becomes a vulnerability. By the time Turner turns 4, Austin has full custodial authority after separating from Sierra, the boy's mother. This means daily protection now depends almost entirely on his father's choices. When new people enter Austin's life, Turner has no power to evaluate risk. He follows his father's lead. Real-life examples across the United States illustrate how a caregiver's silence can have devastating effects. Child welfare reviews show repeated cases where relatives noticed injuries or changes in behavior but failed to intervene, believing a parent's explanation or fearing confrontation. The lesson is stark when adults defer responsibility. Children are left without defense. In Turner's case, what begins as unwavering devotion gradually shifts into silence. Each time an explanation is accepted without verification, each time a bruise goes unexamined by a doctor, the protective bond erodes. For Turner, love remains, but the shield it once offered begins to crack. Section 3. When a new partner enters this household, will Austin's silence hold or break under the weight of what comes next? In the early months of 2022, life on Poplar Ridge Road in Chapmansboro changes course. A new figure enters the household, 24-year-old Shannon Lee Elliott of Springfield, Tennessee. She arrives not as a stranger, but as a partner to Austin Simpkins, Turner's father. At first, her presence carries no immediate alarm. Family acquaintances see her as another young adult working to rebuild her life. She secures employment at a small automotive manufacturing company, a workplace outfitted with basic surveillance cameras, the kind that monitor hallways and storage rooms without attracting much attention. Turner, just 4 years old when she begins appearing in his daily environment, greets her the way children often do, openly, with trust. He has been raised to show politeness to adults, and his first interactions follow that pattern. There is no barrier of suspicion. There is only the reflexive kindness of a child. It is this innocence that will later prove decisive. In homes across America, step-parents or new partners frequently blend into family structures without incident. Some become protective guardians, forming bonds equal to or greater than biological ties. Others, however, destabilize the environment. National child welfare reviews indicate that children in households with unrelated adult partners face an elevated risk of neglect or abuse. The reasons are complex stress from financial strain, unresolved conflict, or resentment toward existing attachments, but the pattern is measurable. As Shannon settles into Austin's household, her relationship with Turner's father becomes a gateway. Because Austin holds custody, Turner spends more time in that home than with his mother. Each adult decision about who lives under the same roof reshapes the boy's daily safety. For Turner, who still regards Austin as his hero, there is no option but to accept Shannon as part of the family routine. This trust reflects how children process change. They mirror the acceptance or resistance of the caregiver they rely on most. If a father allows a new partner into the home, the child reads that decision as approval. Over the next months, subtle changes begin to surface. Turner grows quieter. Relatives later recall that his smiles seemed less frequent, and he sometimes startled at sudden movements. These signals, common in child welfare training manuals, are easy to overlook without context. In many American communities, extended families rely on explanations from the custodial parent. A bruise is written off as rough play. a withdrawn mood as fatigue. Without clear confrontation, warning signs accumulate invisibly. The workplace also becomes an unexpected stage. Shannon occasionally brings Turner with her to the automotive shop where she is employed. She frames it as a practical decision, ensuring the boy is supervised rather than left at home. Co-workers see them together, but, as a later case files note, do not intervene. In the United States, mandatory reporting laws vary teachers, doctors, and some professionals are legally required to act on suspicion of abuse, but private employees and small businesses often are not. This creates a gap. Even when behaviors raise unease, no one feels compelled to call authorities. In Turner's situation, that gap proves devastating. It is important to emphasize that at this stage, nothing has been formally reported. There is no file opened by the Tennessee Department of Children's Services, no doctor's note triggering a welfare check. The protective system depends on both evidence and adult action. Without either, an at-risk child remains unseen. The introduction of Shannon into the household illustrates how quickly a child's environment can shift from secure to precarious without formal oversight. The lesson here is broader than one case. Studies conducted by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services highlight that children under the age of 6 are the most vulnerable group for serious abuse. Their dependence is absolute, and their voices carry little weight in official decisions. Turner's dependence on adults his father, his new caretaker, his wider community mirrors this national pattern. His safety rests entirely on whether others choose to act. By mid-2022, Turner's life is balanced between two realities: weekends with his mother, still filled with affection and stability, and weekdays under his father's custody, now shared with a partner who commands increasing influence over household dynamics. The warmth of his early years remains visible, but strains are beginning to show. When a child grows quieter, hungrier for reassurance, or carries small, unexplained injuries, those signs are rarely loud. They require observation, confrontation, and persistence to interpret correctly. Too often, they are explained away. This stage of the timeline is crucial because it sets the framework for what follows. Shannon's entry is not dramatic in its beginning. It is incremental, ordinary, and unremarkable, precisely why it proves so dangerous. In many households, the intrusion of a new adult is simply another chapter of family life. In Turner's, it becomes the point at which silence and oversight begin to fracture the shield of safety he once believed unbreakable. The betrayal that defines this story does not erupt suddenly. It begins here, in quiet shifts, with a child trusting that adults around him will continue to provide the protection he has always known. What happens when the very cameras meant for workplace security become silent witnesses to something no one should ignore? From May 2 to July 19, 2023, surveillance cameras in a small automotive workplace in Springfield, Tennessee, run without interruption. Installed originally for security, they capture daily routines, employees moving between desks, phones ringing, customers arriving. What no one anticipates is that these ordinary cameras will document 79 consecutive days in which a child's trust is met with betrayal. Turner, 5 years old, spends his days here under the supervision of his father's partner, Shannon Elliott. Each morning, she brings him into the shop. Each evening, he leaves. What unfolds in between becomes evidence not just of one household's failure, but of how entire systems can look away. On review, investigators later confirm that in 40 of the 79 days, Turner is seen experiencing direct physical mistreatment. The files the investigators present in court, files the person claims are evidence not shown here, catalog patterns that escalate over time. A single slap on one day becomes a series of strikes the next. A harsh command grows into hours of isolation. The footage is time-stamped, methodical, and leaves little room for denial. Turner's behavior begins to shift across these recordings. At first, he is still the boy recognizable in family photos, energetic, seeking engagement. Quick to smile, gradually, he retreats into silence. He flinches at movement. He sits motionless when ordered. The trust that once defined him appears to erode, replaced by caution. Child psychologists later explain that such behaviors align with what is termed learned helplessness, a pattern where a child concludes that resistance only brings further punishment, so withdrawal becomes a survival strategy. The presence of surveillance introduces a painful irony. Every incident is captured, yet no one intervenes. Coworkers are in adjacent rooms. Customers come and go. The footage exists, but in real time, it is unmonitored. The system functions as a recorder, not as a protector. This distinction matters. Cameras deter theft because businesses act immediately when losses are detected. But for children, unless an adult reviews the footage, the harm remains unseen. Turner's ordeal demonstrates the difference between documentation and action. In one later referenced example from May 2023, Turner is visible sitting in a corner of the office for extended periods, directed to remain still. He complies, small frame pressed against the wall. To an untrained eye, it may appear like discipline. To trained investigators, however, the duration and intensity signal something else: isolation as control. The footage does not need interpretation by outsiders to prove harm, yet in the moment, no safeguard exists. Across the United States, other cases echo this pattern. In Florida in 2018, hidden cameras in a daycare captured caregivers using physical punishment that went unreported for weeks. In Indiana in 2020, a nanny cam exposed mistreatment of an infant only after parents reviewed the footage. These examples underline a consistent theme: recording devices are passive tools. They cannot substitute for vigilance, reporting, and enforcement. Turner's case illustrates this on a devastating scale. The accumulation of 79 days of video ultimately becomes decisive for investigators. When the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation later receives the drives, agents commit nearly 2,000 hours to watching, cataloging, and cross-referencing. They record each incident, each timestamp, each observable change in Turner's demeanor. The files create a ledger of harm that a courtroom cannot dismiss. For prosecutors, it is evidence beyond testimony, frames that speak without interpretation. Yet, the existence of this record raises a question: what might have changed if a single adult had acted earlier? If a coworker had reviewed footage, if a supervisor had noticed the child's condition, if a parent had sought medical review after unexplained bruises. This is not to shift accountability away from the offender, but to highlight how protective systems fail when individuals assume someone else will intervene. The lesson for viewers is clear. Cameras do not prevent child abuse, communities do. By late June 2023, the footage shows a boy visibly diminished. His clothing appears looser. His energy is absent. Where once he sang along to songs or moved freely, he now sits with his gaze fixed downward. These are not just images on a monitor. They are signs of a child losing vitality in real time. The betrayal is not abstract, it is recorded. The legal weight of these recordings cannot be overstated. In many child abuse prosecutions, cases hinge on testimony that is difficult to verify. Here, the timeline is preserved, down to the minute. Investigators, prosecutors, and eventually a judge will all see what those cameras captured. Turner cannot speak for himself, but the files provide a voice no one can mute. This section of the story shifts the focus from the private realm of a household to the public realm of documentation. The betrayal is no longer hidden. It is preserved in digital form. Yet preservation without intervention prolongs harm. For Turner, each day on camera is another day unprotected. For the community, each unreviewed file is a reminder that evidence means nothing until someone chooses to act. What happens when the escalating patterns seen on those cameras reach a point where even survival becomes uncertain? By mid-May 2023, the pattern visible on workplace surveillance begins to change in severity and frequency. What started as isolated slaps or harsh commands shifts into repeated acts designed to dominate Turner's every movement. Investigators reviewing the files later confirm that by this stage, violence is not occasional, it is sustained. The boy's body language evolves accordingly. Where once he protested, now he submits quickly, folding inward, avoiding eye contact. Each new incident builds on the last, creating a cycle of escalation familiar to experts in child welfare and criminal psychology. Escalation is rarely sudden. Case studies from across the United States show that abusive behavior often begins with acts a community might dismiss as discipline taken too far. A slap is written off as a loss of temper. Raised voices are justified as stress. Yet, over time, these patterns normalize within the household. The child adjusts to survive, the adult tests boundaries, the violence intensifies. In Turner's case, the escalation is not hidden in retrospect, it is time-stamped, documented, and later cataloged by authorities. The tragedy lies in the fact that no one acted on those early markers when intervention was still possible. As weeks pass, Turner's physical state begins to show visible decline in the recordings. His once playful energy fades. He sits longer in corners, his frame smaller against office walls. He eats less and grows increasingly subdued. Pediatric specialists who later review the case point to these changes as classic indicators of chronic mistreatment, diminished appetite, social withdrawal, loss of developmental milestones. Turner, once a child who sang Disney songs in the backyard, no longer sings at all. These behavioral changes serve as silent testimony of escalating harm. The difference between slaps and torture lies not only in degree, but in intent. Torture, as defined in legal and clinical contexts, refers to sustained acts designed to break resistance and instill fear. Turner's responses captured on camera, flinching before contact, covering his face preemptively, freezing when commanded, demonstrate that he understood resistance was futile. Experts describe this as conditioning. Each punishment teaches the child that compliance will not guarantee safety, but resistance will ensure greater pain. The result is despair. The role of Austin, Turner's father, becomes increasingly consequential during this escalation. Records confirm that Turner often returned home with unexplained injuries. Relatives noticed changes in his appearance and demeanor. Yet, no medical evaluation is sought, and no report is filed. This silence compounds the harm. Scholars of child protection call this bystander betrayal, when someone with power to act validates abuse through inaction. For Turner, the betrayal is particularly devastating because it comes from the very person he believes to be his protector. Similar cases reveal how silence magnifies danger. In 2013 in Phoenix, a young girl's injuries worsened over months while caregivers accepted false explanations. Only when she collapsed in public did intervention occur. In 2018 in Pennsylvania, a step-parent's escalating abuse ended fatally after a biological parent ignored warning signs. These real-world examples echo Turner's story. Escalation thrives when silence shields the offender from scrutiny. By June 18, 2023, Turner's 5th birthday arrives. That day, he is returned to his mother, Sierra, who photographs him smiling, laughing, and playing. For that one day, outward signs of injury are absent. To those present, it appears a celebration like any other. But in retrospect, investigators interpret this carefully timed appearance as concealment and effort to disguise ongoing mistreatment. This practice is common in abusive contexts, where abusers temporarily reduce visible harm to avoid detection during public or family interactions. It demonstrates planning, a deliberate attempt to maintain control while evading suspicion. After the birthday passes, the escalation resumes with greater intensity. Surveillance files show Turner wearing long sleeves and pants in the height of summer. Clothing choices later interpreted as attempts to hide injuries. His weight appears to decline, his posture slumps, and his expressions flatten into resignation. When reviewing the footage, investigators note that even moments of apparent calm carry the imprint of control. Turner sits where directed, remains quiet for hours, and avoids gestures that might draw attention. His silence is not compliance, it is survival. The lesson here extends beyond one case. Escalation is identifiable if adults choose to look closely. Children do not deteriorate suddenly. They send signals through behavior, appearance, and mood. When those signals are ignored, the trajectory often ends in irreversible harm. Turner's recorded decline serves as a case study in missed opportunities, each one a moment where intervention could have changed the outcome. By July 2023, the cumulative effect of 79 days becomes visible in Turner's fragile frame. The escalation from slaps to systematic control is no longer arguable. It is preserved in files now central to a criminal case. For investigators, the evidence is irrefutable. For Turner, the cost is irreversible. What happens when the silence surrounding this escalation collides with the final days of a child who no longer has the strength to endure? In the chronology of Turner Simpkins' short life, the presence of his father, Austin Gordon Simpkins, stands as both a source of early joy and later as a decisive failure. From the time Turner is born in June 2018 until mid-2022, Austin plays the role of primary caregiver. The bond between father and son is widely recognized by family and neighbors. Turner clings to him, imitates his mannerisms, and depends on him for reassurance. When custody arrangements give Austin day-to-day responsibility, this trust deepens. But in 2023, that same trust becomes the pathway through which harm continues unchecked. During the 79 days captured on workplace surveillance cameras between May and July 2023, Turner endures escalating mistreatment while in Shannon Elliott's care. What makes this sequence especially critical is that Austin is not an absent figure during this period. Records later reviewed by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation show that he is present in the home, aware of his son's deteriorating condition, and yet no action is taken. Turner arrives from shifts with visible injuries. His behavior changes withdrawn, anxious, subdued. Relatives and neighbors recall noticing the difference, but explanations offered by Austin, echoing Shannon's claims, are accepted: a fall, a bump, an accident. Each story minimizes the harm. Psychologists studying parental complicity describe this as betrayal trauma. For a child, the betrayal is not only the act of violence itself, but the silence of the caregiver who fails to intervene. Turner continues to run to his father for protection, still believing that the person he idolizes will defend him. Each unanswered plea, each overlooked bruise, compounds the psychological damage. Silence becomes its own form of abuse. This pattern is not unique to this household. Across the United States, courts have prosecuted parents not only for direct abuse, but for allowing it to continue. In 2015 in Minnesota, a mother was convicted of child neglect after failing to act while her partner repeatedly harmed her son. In 2019 in Texas, a father was sentenced for injury by omission when investigators confirmed that he knew of ongoing abuse and did nothing. These cases highlight a principle in child protection law. Parental silence in the face of clear harm constitutes criminal liability. It acknowledges that neglect is not passive, it actively enables the offender. In Turner's case, the betrayal carries added weight because of the visible closeness between father and son. Extended family described Austin as once attentive, a father who built swings in the backyard and carried Turner on his shoulders. The contrast between those memories and the documented inaction in 2023 becomes central to understanding the depth of the failure. The betrayal is not abstract, it is the collapse of the very bond that gave Turner his strongest sense of security. Investigators later conclude that Austin had multiple opportunities to intervene. He could have sought medical treatment when injuries appeared. He could have contacted Child Protective Services. He could have removed Turner from Shannon's care altogether. Each of these actions was available, and each would have altered the timeline. Instead, silence prevailed. This silence is not explained in official records with certainty, but professionals in the field of domestic violence point to patterns of denial, dependence on a partner, or fear of confrontation as potential reasons why caregivers sometimes fail to protect. Regardless of cause, the consequence is the same: the child is left unprotected. The lesson here is clear. Silence is not neutrality, it is complicity. For children under custodial care, protection is not optional, it is a legal and moral obligation. When that obligation is abandoned, the result is betrayal layered upon betrayal. Turner is not only harmed by the acts of one adult, but by the inaction of the one person he trusted most. By January 2025, more than a year after Turner's death, the legal system acknowledges this betrayal. A Cheatham County grand jury indicts Austin on charges of aggravated child neglect and child abuse, confirming formally what had already been evident, that his silence played a role in the outcome. The arrest demonstrates a principle that extends beyond this case. Parents who fail to act when confronted with evidence of harm cannot claim innocence through inaction. For Turner, the emotional toll of that silence can never be measured in full. Every time he sought comfort from his father and was met instead with continued exposure to danger, the betrayal deepened. His belief in protection endured until the end, but the protection never came. This section of the story underscores how betrayal is not limited to the offender who acts, but includes the caregiver who fails to defend. It reframes the narrative from one of individual cruelty to one of compounded abandonment. Turner's life illustrates how silence can be as destructive as violence itself. What happens when this silence collides with the final days of a child whose body and spirit are already exhausted? By July 19, 2023, the surveillance cameras at the automotive shop stop recording. For 79 days, they have documented Turner's decline, but in the final 4 days of his life, the cameras fall silent. What remains are medical records, autopsy reports, and the recollections of those present files investigators later compile as evidence not shown here. Together, they trace the closing chapter of a boy who, at just 5 years old, is already diminished by prolonged abuse. On July 19th, Turner appears in the last available footage. He is described as frail, sitting quietly in the corner of the shop. His clothing hangs loosely, long sleeves and pants chosen in midsummer. His bright eyes, once animated, now stare without focus. For investigators, this image becomes a visual marker of collapse. Child specialists reviewing the files explain that children enduring prolonged maltreatment often reach a point of emotional detachment. It is a psychological defense, a retreat inward when external help never arrives. From July 20th through July 22nd, Turner remains in the household on Poplar Ridge Road. Official timelines confirm that his father, Austin, is present during parts of this period. What he sees? What he hears and how he responds become central to the later criminal charges against him. What is certain is that Turner's physical condition continues to deteriorate. When the medical examiner later documents his state, the findings confirm severe internal trauma and malnutrition. These injuries are not new, they are cumulative, layered over weeks, and in the final days, they intensify. On July 21, 2023, emergency responders are dispatched to the residence. They find Turner unresponsive on an exterior deck. The time is just after 4:30 p.m. Despite resuscitation efforts, his death is pronounced within minutes. Paramedics note extensive injuries and a body temperature well below normal. What they observe raises immediate suspicion. The explanations offered at the scene that he had fallen from a moving vehicle do not match the medical presentation. Procedures begin quickly. Law enforcement secures the scene. Photographs are taken, and the child's body is transferred to the state medical examiner's office for autopsy. The autopsy, performed over 2 days in late July, concludes that Turner dies from multiple blunt force injuries compounded by malnutrition. Forensic specialists rule the death a homicide. The medical examiner emphasizes the chronic nature of the injuries, noting signs of harm at different stages of healing. This matters for investigators. It establishes not a single accident, but a prolonged course of mistreatment. In legal terms, it elevates the case from a question of negligence to one of deliberate, repeated harm. What makes these final 4 days particularly significant is not only the severity of the injuries, but the absence of intervention. Turner is not alone in a remote area. He is in a home with adults who see him daily. Each missed opportunity, each decision not to seek medical care, not to alert authorities, represents a failure that compounds his suffering. This is why prosecutors later frame Austin's silence as more than a mistake. It is complicity. The tragedy also underscores a wider lesson. In many child protection cases, the decisive window to act closes not because warning signs are absent, but because they are ignored. Bruises explained away, sudden behavioral changes dismissed as mood swings, weight loss attributed to illness, each explanation postpones intervention. By the time the truth becomes undeniable, it is often too late. Turner's final days illustrate this principle with painful clarity. The community impact begins immediately. News of a 5-year-old's death in Cheatham County spreads quickly, prompting grief and questions. How could a child surrounded by family, neighbors, and co-workers slip through every layer of protection? The answer lies not in the absence of signals, but in the absence of response. Turner's decline is visible, his cries audible, his trust unwavering until the end. But none of these factors shield him when adults choose silence. The files later presented in court establish the timeline beyond dispute. They show a boy who begins July still alive, diminished but enduring, and who, by July 23, is gone. They confirm that opportunities to act existed until the final day, and they demonstrate how betrayal, when repeated, erodes every safeguard until only tragedy remains. The fatal 4 days mark the turning point of the case, the transition from recorded evidence to irreversible outcome. For investigators, they frame the legal charges that follow. For Turner's family, they represent the end of a life, once filled with laughter, now silenced at just 5 years, 1 month and 5 days old. What happens when this death moves from private tragedy to a public courtroom, where every frame of evidence and every day of silence must be measured against the law? By July 19, 2023, the surveillance cameras at the automotive shop stop recording. For 79 days, they have documented Turner's decline, but in the final 4 days of his life, the cameras fall silent. What remains are medical records, autopsy reports, and the recollections of those present files investigators later compile as evidence not shown here. Together, they trace the closing chapter of a boy who, at just 5 years old, is already diminished by prolonged abuse. On July 19th, Turner appears in the last available footage. He is described as frail, sitting quietly in the corner of the shop. His clothing hangs loosely, long sleeves and pants chosen in midsummer. His bright eyes, once animated, now stare without focus. For investigators, this image becomes a visual marker of collapse. Child specialists reviewing the files explain that children enduring prolonged maltreatment often reach a point of emotional detachment. It is a psychological defense, a retreat inward when external help never arrives. From July 20th through July 22nd, Turner remains in the household on Poplar Ridge Road. Official timelines confirm that his father, Austin, is present during parts of this period. What he sees, what he hears, and how he responds become central to the later criminal charges against him. What is certain is that Turner's physical condition continues to deteriorate. When the medical examiner later documents his state, the findings confirm severe internal trauma and malnutrition. These injuries are not new, they are cumulative, layered over weeks, and in the final days, they intensify. On July 21, 2023, emergency responders are dispatched to the residence. They find Turner unresponsive on an exterior deck. The time is just after 4:30 p.m. Despite resuscitation efforts, his death is pronounced within minutes. Paramedics note extensive injuries and a body temperature well below normal. What they observe raises immediate suspicion. The explanations offered at the scene that he had fallen from a moving vehicle do not match the medical presentation. Procedures begin quickly. Law enforcement secures the scene. Photographs are taken, and the child's body is transferred to the state medical examiner's office for autopsy. The autopsy, performed over 2 days in late July, concludes that Turner dies from multiple blunt force injuries compounded by malnutrition. Forensic specialists rule the death a homicide. The medical examiner emphasizes the chronic nature of the injuries, noting signs of harm at different stages of healing. This matters for investigators. It establishes not a single accident, but a prolonged course of mistreatment. In legal terms, it elevates the case from a question of negligence to one of deliberate, repeated harm. What makes these final 4 days particularly significant is not only the severity of the injuries, but the absence of intervention. Turner is not alone in a remote area. He is in a home with adults who see him daily. Each missed opportunity, each decision not to seek medical care, not to alert authorities represents a failure that compounds his suffering. This is why prosecutors later frame Austin's silence as more than a mistake. It is complicity. The tragedy also underscores a wider lesson. In many child protection cases, the decisive window to act closes not because warning signs are absent, but because they are ignored. Bruises explained away, sudden behavioral changes dismissed as mood swings, weight loss attributed to illness, each explanation postpones intervention. By the time the truth becomes undeniable, it is often too late. Turner's final days illustrate this principle with painful clarity. The community impact begins immediately. News of a 5-year-old's death in Cheatham County spreads quickly, prompting grief and questions. How could a child surrounded by family, neighbors, and co-workers slip through every layer of protection? The answer lies not in the absence of signals, but in the absence of response. Turner's decline is visible, his cries audible, his trust unwavering until the end. But none of these factors shield him when adults choose silence. The files later presented in court establish the timeline beyond dispute. They show a boy who begins July still alive, diminished but enduring, and who, by July 23, is gone. They confirm that opportunities to act existed until the final day, and they demonstrate how betrayal, when repeated, erodes every safeguard until only tragedy remains. The fatal 4 days mark the turning point of the case, the transition from recorded evidence to irreversible outcome. For investigators, they frame the legal charges that follow. For Turner's family, they represent the end of a life, once filled with laughter, now silenced at just 5 years, 1 month and 5 days old. What happens when this death moves from private tragedy to a public courtroom, where every frame of evidence and every day of silence must be measured against the law? On March 4, 2024, the Cheatham County Grand Jury returns indictments against 26-year-old Shannon Lee Elliott. The charges are 2 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of aggravated child abuse. The indictment follows months of review by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, which has combed through 79 days of surveillance files, autopsy results, and witness interviews. The grand jury's decision signals that the evidence is considered sufficient to bring the case forward for trial. That same evening, Elliott is arrested and booked into the county jail. Bail is set at $1 million, a figure chosen not as a valuation of life but as a mechanism to prevent release before trial. Courtroom proceedings begin months later. On July 30, 2024, Elliott enters a plea of no contest. This plea is significant. It is not an admission of guilt in the traditional sense, but it concedes that the state possesses enough evidence to convict. Legal scholars often describe it as a strategic move, avoiding the spectacle of a contested trial while accepting the consequences of conviction. For prosecutors, it ensures accountability without forcing Turner's surviving family to relive every detail through extended testimony. For the court, it speeds resolution while preserving the factual record. When prosecutors outline their case in open court, they rely on a meticulous record. They describe the surveillance footage, the documented injuries, and the timeline built by investigators. Files the state presents as evidence not shown here cover more than 1,000 hours of review and hundreds of cataloged incidents. For 20 minutes, the courtroom listens as state attorneys summarize what those files reveal: a child harmed repeatedly over a span of weeks, a pattern escalating until death. Observers report that the courtroom falls into silence not from spectacle, but from the gravity of systematic evidence. Judge David Wolf presides. With decades of legal experience, he has heard thousands of cases. Yet during sentencing, his demeanor shifts. He acknowledges openly that the facts presented are among the most disturbing of his career. His comments underscore a crucial point in American jurisprudence. Even seasoned judges are not immune to the human weight of evidence. The law requires impartiality, but it also recognizes the moral dimension of accountability. In this case, the law moves firmly to protect the dignity of the child whose voice can no longer be heard. Elliott is sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole only after 51 years. The sentence reflects Tennessee statute, which requires decades of incarceration before parole eligibility in first-degree murder cases. 2 additional counts of aggravated child abuse are added as concurrent 20-year terms. Practically, this means that Elliott will spend the majority of her life in custody. The sentence is not symbolic. It establishes a precedent for how the state treats prolonged child abuse cases where death results. For Turner's family, the proceedings provide a measure of justice, but not closure. Relatives attend the hearing, some providing statements, others simply present as witnesses. The community, too, pays attention. Local news outlets in Nashville and Clarksville cover the outcome, framing it as a case that reveals both the failures of protection and the eventual reach of accountability. The trial does not erase the betrayal Turner endured, but it affirms that the state recognizes his life mattered. This courtroom chapter also delivers lessons relevant beyond Tennessee. Legal analysts point out that the existence of video evidence is rare in child abuse cases. Most rely on testimony, medical opinion, and circumstantial indicators. The Simpkins case demonstrates how surveillance can transform a prosecution from contested narrative into irrefutable sequence. It also raises questions about responsibility. Why must the justice system wait until after death to act, when signs were visible in real time? The tension between prevention and punishment remains unresolved, but the trial highlights the cost of silence. Examples from other states show the broader context. In California, 2020, prosecutors secured a conviction in a child neglect case, despite limited physical evidence, relying heavily on medical experts. In Kentucky, 2022, a step-parent was convicted based largely on testimony from siblings. By contrast, the Turner Simpkins case provides the court with a direct visual record. This difference accelerates proceedings and strengthens sentencing arguments. It demonstrates that when evidence is undeniable, justice moves with greater certainty. The trial also sets the stage for accountability beyond one defendant. During proceedings, investigators continue to evaluate the role of Austin Simpkins, Turner's father. Questions of omission, what he knew, what he failed to report, remain unresolved. The court's handling of Shannon Elliott's case clarifies that active harm is punished decisively. The question now shifts to whether passive neglect, when it enables harm, carries equal weight in the eyes of the law. The symbolism of the trial resonates in Tennessee. For communities shaken by Turner's death, the courtroom affirms that the state will not dismiss crimes against children as private matters. It places responsibility not only on the individual who acted, but on the structures that failed. For audiences watching or reading about the case, the lesson is clear: the law can punish after harm. But prevention depends on everyday choices, recognizing signs, speaking up, refusing silence. As the gavel falls and sentencing is complete, one chapter closes. Shannon Elliott is removed from the courtroom to begin her life sentence. The files remain, the evidence preserved. For Turner, justice in law has been delivered, though too late to protect him. But what happens when the focus shifts from this conviction to the man who was closest to Turner, the father whose silence may have mattered as much as the violence itself? On January 6, 2025, more than 18 months after Turner's death, investigators in Cheatham County make a second arrest. This time, it is not Shannon Elliott, already serving a life sentence, but Turner's father, Austin Gordon Simpkins. The charge is not direct violence, but aggravated child neglect and child abuse by omission. For prosecutors, the evidence compiled over the past year confirms what had long been suspected, that Austin knew about the abuse his son endured and chose silence over action. The decision to indict a parent for failure to protect is not made lightly. Prosecutors must demonstrate not only knowledge, but a clear pattern of inaction when intervention was possible. In this case, investigators present accounts of Turner returning from work shifts with visible injuries, his demeanor withdrawn, and his physical health deteriorating. They also rely on testimony from relatives who noticed changes and on the detailed timeline already established by surveillance files. When combined, these elements construct a narrative of omission. Austin is not accused of causing the injuries himself, but of allowing them to continue in plain sight. Child protection law in the United States recognizes omission as a form of betrayal equal in weight to action. Statutes in Tennessee, like those in many states, define aggravated child neglect as knowingly failing to protect a child from abuse, especially when harm results in serious injury or death. The reasoning is clear. Children are entirely dependent on adults for safety, and silence in the face of harm becomes complicity. Turner's case illustrates this principle in its starkest form. The father who once built swings in the yard becomes the man who does nothing while his child deteriorates. Other cases across the country reinforce why prosecutors pursue these charges. In Ohio in 2021, a mother received a prison sentence after investigators proved she ignored medical warnings about her partner's treatment of her son. In Arizona in 2017, a father was convicted after admitting he noticed injuries on his daughter, but deferred to his girlfriend's explanations. These examples show that courts increasingly recognize inaction as a decisive factor in a child's death. By charging Austin, Tennessee aligns with this trend, affirming that neglect is not passive but a form of active betrayal. The arrest also represents a broader shift in public accountability. When Shannon was first convicted, much of the community's focus centered on her role as the direct perpetrator. But over time, questions persisted. How could a father, present in the home, not intervene? The January 2025 indictment answers those questions with legal clarity. Silence, in this context, is criminal. It reframes the case from one of individual cruelty to one of dual betrayal violence from one adult and abdication from another. The symbolism of Austin's arrest reverberates beyond the courtroom. For Turner's surviving relatives, it acknowledges what they long feared, that the person their son trusted most abandoned that trust. For child advocates, it sends a message that protection is not optional, and that the state will pursue those who fail in this duty. The lesson is direct. Love without action is not protection. Children require adults to act decisively, even when confrontation is uncomfortable or costly. Legally, Austin now faces the weight of a system that treated his silence as a crime. He is booked into the Cheatham County Jail, awaiting trial. The charges carry significant penalties. If convicted, he could face decades in prison, not because of what he did with his hands, but because of what he refused to do with his authority. The state's position is unambiguous by failing to act. He allowed Turner's suffering to continue until death. The fall from grace is evident. In family photographs, Austin once stood as a symbol of strength to his children. In community memory, he was the father who carried his son on his shoulders. By 2025, he is recast in the legal record as a man whose silence betrayed the most basic duty of parenthood. His transformation is not sensationalized, it is documented step by step, from presence in the home to absence of intervention, from father to defendant. For the audience, the takeaway extends beyond one household in Tennessee. It is a call to vigilance. When you see warning signs, when a child's demeanor shifts, when injuries remain unexplained, silence is not neutrality, it is complicity. Turner's story underlines this in the harshest terms. A child cannot remove himself from danger. That responsibility rests entirely on the adults around him. As Austin's case moves forward, the narrative shifts from Shannon's conviction to the broader question of accountability within families. The law has already ruled on the perpetrator. Now it must decide how to measure the guilt of the silent witness. What will the court decide when faced with a father who loved in words but betrayed in silence? By early 2025, the legal record surrounding Turner Simpkins is clear. One adult stands convicted of murder and sentenced to life. Another faces trial for aggravated neglect and abuse by omission. But while the courtroom has answered questions of guilt, the wider consequences reach beyond a single Tennessee family. Turner's story forces the United States to confront its ongoing failures in protecting children, even when warning signs are visible. Child welfare reports show that each year in America, hundreds of children die not because no one saw the signs, but because no one acted on them. Bruises explained away, withdrawn behavior dismissed as personality change, neighbors silenced by fear of getting involved. These factors repeat across states. In Turner's case, the evidence was as undeniable as it gets: 79 days of surveillance files, witnesses nearby, and repeated opportunities for intervention. Yet he still died unprotected. This reality demonstrates that systems can record and archive, but cannot replace human courage. The betrayal here is not only personal, but institutional. Tennessee's child welfare framework, like those of many states, operates with high caseloads and limited oversight. Agencies rely heavily on reports from caregivers, teachers, and medical staff. Without those reports, no file is opened. Turner's life underscores the weakness of a system built on reactive measures. By the time agencies respond, harm is often entrenched. Experts in child protection argue for proactive monitoring, community education, and stronger cross-checks between schools, healthcare providers, and social services. Without these, the cycle repeats. Real-life examples echo this need. In California in 2019, a child's death led to reforms requiring closer coordination between hospitals and child welfare. In Florida in 2021, legislative changes mandated more training for teachers on recognizing subtle signs of abuse. Each reform emerges only after tragedy, yet prevention demands anticipation, not reaction. Turner's case now stands as a Tennessee example, a case that should push the state and the nation to consider whether waiting for a crisis is acceptable. The lesson for viewers is sobering. Silence is not neutral. If you see something and say nothing, you participate in the betrayal. Child advocates stress that early reports, even if unproven, can save lives. Investigations exist to separate false alarms from genuine danger, but without reports, there is no investigation. In Turner's case, silence from adults inside and outside the home became the invisible weapon that magnified harm. The betrayal was layered: one adult who inflicted, another who ignored, and a wider circle that chose comfort over confrontation. Turner's story also illustrates how betrayal reshapes trust. Communities rely on families as the first line of protection. When that protection collapses, the weight falls on schools, doctors, neighbors, and ultimately, the courts. By then, the child is often beyond rescue. For America to change course, responsibility must shift earlier into the moments when a bruise is noticed, when a child grows uncharacteristically quiet, when explanations no longer match reality. This is not just Tennessee's story. It belongs to every state, every community, and every household that has hesitated to speak. It is a reminder that justice after the fact cannot restore what is lost. Turner's name should not become another entry in an annual report. It should become a catalyst for action for parents who doubt their instincts, for neighbors who fear being wrong, for teachers and doctors who wonder if filing a report will matter. The answer is always yeah, action matters because silence kills. For Turner, justice now exists in law. His offender is imprisoned. His father stands accused. His story is told so that others might see the signs earlier. But justice for Turner alone is not enough. True justice means ensuring no child follows his path. It means dismantling the silence that betrays, one decision at a time. So the question remains, will America allow Turner's story to fade into memory? Or will his short life finally teach us to break the silence before another child is left defenseless?